Watch Diary. My name is Ryan Snelling, and as always, I'm happy to be here with you. We've got a big episode today. We're going to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Pretty exciting, right? I hope you had a great weekend. I had an okay weekend. It was super relaxing. I got to meal prep. I got to go to a family derby party, which I'm indifferent about because if you don't know, I don't like horses. And the Kentucky Derby, look, it's a big deal where I live, in Kentucky, obviously. But at the same time, it's one of those things that peeves me as a human being, and I have to get it under control, because I think the theme of this week should be, hey, just let people like what they like. But sometimes, do you ever question why people like the things that they like? Or do you ever question the authenticity of it? Because my entire life, growing up in Kentucky, I've never cared about horse racing or the Derby. And most people, just like most people don't care about comic book movies when you zoom out, most people in Kentucky don't care or follow or have knowledge of horse racing. So every time the Kentucky Derby rolls around and it's this big event, it's one of the most like fraudulent fandoms in existence. It really is. Because really what it is that people get together and they go through the extent of like dressing up, and it's just an excuse to party, which is fine. But sometimes it just feels fraudulent. And I've never been about that. I've never just come up with an excuse to... Actually, that might be the problem, is that sometimes I would just drink nonstop. I haven't really drank in a while, in terms of it being a habit. But I don't know. I've just never been that way. I've never been a party hardy or went to look for an excuse to get drunk or anything like that. So when people act like they're into this horse race, it just... whatever. It just bothers me, and I can't help it. It should, what? What am I saying? Should I let people have fun? Yeah, I have no problem with it, but at the same time, it's fraudulent. Like, how am I supposed to be in a room with people where I'm just like, you don't actually care about this. You don't follow this. And just because anyway, that kind of stuff bothers me, but I got through it. It's such a stupid take. So dumb. I just can't. It's my instinct. I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. Instinctively, I have a problem with people that do things like that. But then again, somebody could probably say that, I do something like that, but whatever. I have to work through it. All right, I'll talk to my therapist about it. Welcome to Watch Diary. Regardless, here's something that you can hear. You can be proud of me for this. People are concerned about my credit card debt. I talk about debt on Hot Takes and Sausage, my podcast with Brando. And I just want to let you all know that you should be proud of me. Because here's what I've done the past 2 days. I've made my own cold brew at home. And this was coffee that I already had in my pantry. Now, hold on. I've had it in my pantry for a while. And I could have made cold brew this entire time with it. But guys, the thing about going to Starbucks on the way to work, it's the convenience. Sometimes I forget to make the cold brew. It takes hours. So that's why, out of habit, I went to Starbucks instead of making my own cold brew. But here's what I did. Made my cold brew. Got it right here. It's my mushroom cold brew. And I transferred $5.57. I know it probably hurts your heart, but that's how much a Trenta black cold brew costs where I live. $5.57 after tax. I transferred $5.57 into my savings account today. And as Ben Brasso pointed out, 2 weeks of cold brew can pay for that vacuum I just bought. So that's what I'm going to do. Hopefully this week, I have to buy more mushroom cold brew, but in the end, it'll still save me money. The most important part is the savings transfer. So every single day that I go without Starbucks, maybe even if I still go get Starbucks, maybe I should still put $5.57 in my savings account every single day, and that'll rack up. But anyway, it's not going to get me out of debt, but it's something that I'm bettering myself, I think, right? Thanks to you. You guys inspired me, as always. look, we got a Marvel movie to talk about, so let's just go on and get right to it. I am not doing a Marvel ranking until after Secret Invasion, because if you don't know my rule, only one Marvel ranking every 6 months, so 2 in a year. Now, I will also do probably some sort of like trilogies ranking or something. I'll do something special for it because it is fun. It is fun to rank the Marvel movies and to talk about them at length, and my takes on them constantly change. So I do find it still a ripe topic to discuss, but I'm also not gonna do a ranking every time. And shout out to the YouTubers that do that. I just don't want to do that. So one every 6 months, and maybe do like a trilogies ranking or like a Disney Plus ranking or something like that. I need to do a rewatch of Disney Plus shows. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just feel like I do. I'll work through it again in therapy when I talk about my feelings on the Kentucky Derby. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is finally out. It's been 6 months. No, 6 years. 6 months. It's been 6 years since Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which was, at the time, one of my most anticipated Marvel sequels maybe ever. So I want to go through my history with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and then we'll talk about this movie. And I will include spoilers because it's gonna have it had a big opening weekend, so spoilers will be sprinkled, but not quite yet. So right now I'm just gonna talk about Guardians. So the anticipation for Guardians was wild for me personally. I remember when they announced James Gunn as the filmmaker of this weirdo movie, and I didn't have any pre-existing knowledge or fandom of James Gunn as a filmmaker or as Guardians in general, as comic book characters. It caught my eye. I was a reader of Slash Film, and I think they were like one of the big champions of this movie going into it. Slash Film was obsessed with James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, and this was like still before any like trailer or footage came out. I just got this sense that I should care about it. And there's no other real way to put it or quantify it. I didn't know what it was, but I felt the passion for this project very early on. And then when the Comic-Con footage, because if you remember, they aired Comic-Con footage that year. It would have been 2013, I guess. And they had only been shooting for like 12 days or something like that. I remember specifically seeing a leak, and it was the image of Rocket firing his blaster on Groot's back. And I remember seeing that image and just thinking, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. There's just something about it, and I became really into the character of Rocket that early. Like, Rocket was the character that I had my eyes on, again, without any knowledge of who this team was and who these characters were. I had my eye on the character of Rocket, and I was really excited to see what Marvel was going to do. And then obviously, Bradley Cooper, he's one of my favorite actors. I don't get enough Bradley Cooper in my life. I wish he was a little bit more, but I also respect his pickiness when it comes to projects. I wish he was in front of my face more, just because he's an actor that I really admire. But when they announced Bradley Cooper as the voice of Rocket, I mean, it was like J.J. Abrams at the time directing Force Awakens. It was something that I was like, I can't, match made in heaven, right? Obviously, Bradley and Rocket worked out way better. But the anticipation, it was just like unlike anything else. I mean, I got more excited for Guardians of the Galaxy than I have like some sequels that I've actually like already cared about. So anyway, I remember my friends group not really being entirely on board. And the funny thing is, my best friend Eric, his birthday is July 31st, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, well, it's not called Volume 1, but you know what I mean, came out on like August 1st. So we saw the midnight premiere, or the early premiere, on his birthday. It's like something I dragged them all to do when he didn't really want to do it. But I just remember sitting in that theater, glowing, and I think I was smiling ear to ear the entire time. Now that's just like the personal side of it. Of course, the rest is history. Everybody loved that movie. It was wildly successful. It was the first time that we saw Thanos and the Collector and heard about the Infinity Stones, and it was this really weirdo corner movie while also playing a huge role in the overall. And I mean, just think about like the end of the Infinity War teaser. That's how far the Guardians came. We're like, that was the bumper on the first Infinity War teaser when Thor says, "Who the hell are you guys?" And it's a shot of the Guardians. And that's a huge moment for the fans, that the Guardians are finally included in the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, obviously the rest is history, and I can just say a whole bunch of obvious things about how great the franchise is. So, when they announced Volume 2, it was my most anticipated sequel. And this is something that is stuck. Me and Brando talked about this a little bit on the last episode of Hot Takes and Sausage. He was a witness to the lead up of Volume 2 when I did Sight and Sound with Jay Williams. And Jay and I think it's on video, we did a trailer reaction, or we talked about it on the podcast. It was the first trailer reaction to Guardians Volume 2, when like the end bit is Rocket and Groot going back and forth about the button. And I loved the trailer. Jay was like, "Oh, it was cool," in typical Jay fashion. And I was geeking out about it, and I said something hilarious to Brando. There's no way in hell Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 can be bad. And he has laughed all the way home ever since I said that, because when I came out of Guardians Volume 2, I was so disappointed in that movie. And, over time, it's been 6 years, like we said, there's definitely great moments in it, but I don't think it's a great whole. And I get James Gunn has talked a little bit more about how it's important. It definitely has great scenes informing like Rocket's backstory still, and there's some still quality material when it comes to like fatherhood and things like that. But I find that movie to be I think Guardians Volume 2 is like one of the first cases where I decided that Marvel needs to stop trying to be so funny. And I think people forgot that. Like right now, we're talking about how Marvel always goes for the joke and ruins these moments. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was the first time I realized that. And it was the moment, and I've referenced this so many times on the podcast, it was the moment when Peter is fighting Ego and they're flying towards each other, and Peter turns into Pac-Man. And I remember just getting so irritated. Like, why did you have to put a joke in there? Why? I want it to be an epic showdown between father and son. Some of the time I feel that, and some of the time you take it away with dumb shit like that. And I remember getting so upset about that particular joke in particular. Now, I was probably overreacting, but again, that's a common criticism with Marvel now. In Guardians Volume 2, it was too much for me. And it's also where I felt like the Drax was sort of changing too much, and he was like it was really like cruel and mean-spirited to Mantis. Like, it was like stuff that like, it didn't make me mad, but it wasn't funny to me. And I think some of the time I hear them banter, I think it's kind of played. But I don't want to go too hard on that, because I know that's just kind of like part of the Guardians' DNA, and part of the point of their relationship is that they have such a hard time getting along. But it just kind of feels repetitive sometimes. I remember, like, even the taser face stuff, like that stuff didn't hit for me for some reason. It was kind of irritating from Volume 2. So anyway, Volume 2 was a disappointing sequel to me, and Brando loves to remind me of that. Guardians Volume 3, there was a lot of time leading up to it. A lot of stuff has changed, good and bad. First of all, the perspective of Marvel has never, going into the movie, maybe not now, but going into the movie, I don't think the perception of Marvel had ever been lower. Like, I don't know if a lot of people are thinking about that or talking about that, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe stock was ice cold, maybe the coldest it has ever been in 16 years, 15 years? And this was the movie that, I don't know, had to deal with it. And luckily, for the most, I think, actually, not even for the most part, luckily it's succeeding, for sure. And I think it's kind of allowed people to forget where we were and remember where we used to be with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I don't watch Jeremy Jahns. I did watch his review though, and I think he made a lot of good points that unfortunately, because Marvel, it would be stupid to ignore the success of Guardians. And I think Guardians did a lot of things. It opened us up to the space adventures. It just opened up more, I don't know, weirdo, like, pocket universes. And I think it's kind of what allowed even things like for Thor to get crazy and for Ant-Man to get crazy. I think they owe it to Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think both of those franchises have proven that they can't necessarily replicate it, even though they try, for all the wrong reasons. And I think Jeremy Jahns actually made a really great point where, like, Guardians of the Galaxy birthed a sort of tone and a type of humor and so many things that other movies have replicated that we're kind of exhausted by. And so Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, even though it's kind of just still doing its own thing, we're reminded of things that bother us from the other movies. And it's not necessarily Guardians' fault, but I think that's maybe where I'm getting hung up a little bit on what we've got here. But overall, I think Guardians of the Galaxy, so here are my neat little accolades that I like to put on here. Overall, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a good movie, and it's a successful end to this trilogy and franchise. I'm not ranking anything, but if I had to rank, I think it's the second best movie, hands down. I think it sort of leveled out the tone a little bit, where I thought Volume 2 went too far into the comedic direction. Volume 3, there were times where we had super emotional moments, and the way that, like, the sound and music might drop off, and that's when, like, a joke would hit and we'd ruin it. There were times when I was just like, I felt it in the pit of my stomach. A joke's coming. And they wouldn't do it, to my surprise. So, and of course there were jokes, and still there was banter, but I actually thought it was way more disciplined in that regard. So it wasn't like it necessarily continued the path where, from Volume 2. So that kind of stuff, I put all those fears away. I think overall, my issues with Volume 3 are very simple, and they're not overly complex in terms of... I think that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I think some of where we were going in the second act was a little bit meddling. I didn't find it all that interesting or compelling. Not that I have an issue with the overall direction or plot of the story, because I think this movie needed to be about Rocket, and the part that worked the most was dealing with Rocket's background and where he came from, and just everything that hinged on Rocket. That was the crutch of the movie, and it worked. So everything else that comes with it, where, like, the story is, how are they going to save Rocket? They have to go to this place, this place, this place. I saw the term, I've never used this before, so I don't know if it's common, but the movie is a bunch of fetch quests, which I don't disagree. I think that, the particular planets and stuff that we went to, I just didn't find it overall all that interesting, and maybe this is where I kind of felt tired of the humor and things like that. But so along the way, I wasn't necessarily all the way honed in. But whenever they would insert a flashback to Rocket's background or explore more of the High Evolutionary, that's what reeled me back in, and that's what kept me going through this movie. So I don't think it's an incredible whole, but I think there are parts of it that are incredible. And I feel very similarly about this movie as I do Wakanda Forever. Now, when I talk about Wakanda Forever, again, I have kind of issues where I'm not necessarily interested in the second act, and I think that there are scenes in that movie that are too, like, hey, remember this is a Marvel movie. All the stuff with, like, Everett Ross and Julia Louis-Dreyfus' character, who I continue to forget because none of the characters are nearly as memorable as they used to be. But all that stuff was kind of inserted in and felt unnecessary. But based on the task at hand, and based on everything else that I think Wakanda Forever is how the MCU can be super interesting if you allow it to be. And I think Volume 3 is very similar in that regard. Because a lot of the people are kind of talking about how dark and deep, how they're surprised that they explored this much of Rocket's background. I think the High Evolutionary, I think he's an effective villain. And maybe not because he's like Loki status, but he's someone that I hated. I just hated him. And the actor, I don't know, I can't recall his name at the time. The actor's incredible. He does a great job, and he's just a great actor for Marvel. He really just ate this character up. And I think the High Evolutionary worked as a standalone villain a lot better than so many other standalone villains and previously in the MCU. I just hated him because of his history and his background with Rocket and how much I love Rocket. I just found it to be very, very effective. And no, I don't think he's Killmonger status or Thanos status or anything, but while I'm watching a movie, I wanted to punch him in the face. And there were a few times too, and I've seen some criticism where he's just like a guy that walks around yelling about stuff, and I think that's kind of why I got caught up in it, because it was like super intense and emotional, and I was just always reacting to him. Like I'd clench my fist or just get mad at something he did, so I think the High Evolutionary worked. In terms of Adam Warlock, so I talked about this in my quick review that I posted up on the YouTube channel the other day. I was mostly excited to see this character because of the Will Poulter casting. I think Will Poulter is an incredible actor. And I've thought that since We're the Millers. He's incredible in that movie. I know he has like he has more of a history in Europe or England where he's from, but I first saw him in We're the Millers, and I thought he was incredible in that movie. So I've always been excited, whether it was Midsommar or Detroit. I've always been excited to see that dude. I think he's wildly effective. So to see him in the MCU, I was thrilled. So in terms of Adam Warlock, I have no knowledge or pre-existing fandom for that character going into the movie. I don't really know anything about him at all. And it wasn't like one of those things that I was excited about, even because Marvel teased it. Like if Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 didn't include that at all, and it was just James Gunn decided that that's not where he wanted to go, I literally would have been indifferent to that too. Like I just would have been like, okay. And there would have been a lot of fans that were upset by it, because there are a lot of people that are excited to see Adam Warlock for the first time. But so anyway, all that to say, I didn't have any existing excitement for it. I just wanted to see Will Poulter in the MCU, essentially. I don't think what James Gunn did, I don't think it is or isn't true to the character. I don't think that it is or isn't, I don't know, the way that they should have gone. I just know that I'm not personally that attached to him based on this appearance. And, I can go on Twitter and see things in defense of, and I can see both sides of it. All I know is that based on what was done in the movie, I'm still indifferent to the character, and I don't have any really, I want to see him again, and that's all I know to say, really. So, Adam Warlock, he had an incredible entrance, and I felt like opening the movie with him was really effective, because I was kind of like scared and didn't know where the movie was going. And I think that the opening, a lot of people talked about how the opening first act didn't really work for them. I kind of liked it because it was kind of like chill vibes at first. It was kind of just like setting the table of where everybody's been over the last few years. I mean, you have Quill, who's been drinking because he's heartbroken over Gamora, but you also have people trying to live their life on Nowhere, and you have Kraglin working on using the arrow, and just like stuff like that. I kind of liked it. It was just setting the table for what was to come, and then all of a sudden Adam Warlock shows up and wrecks shop, and I liked that. I thought it was good, and I was scared of him. But as the movie went on, and the more you dive deep into it, I lost that fear, and so yeah, I'm really indifferent to that character. But I think here's the question I have. So here's where we get into spoiler territory, but I don't even know if it really is spoiler territory. Because now that I'm thinking about it, because because I've only seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 twice in my life. I Did the Marvel Cinematic Universe forget that Star-Lord is half celestial? I just feel like we learned that he was like almost a god as well. And he's been completely neutered. Like, he is literally still just a guy with blaster. Excuse me. He's literally just a guy with blasters. And I don't really get it. Because I'm waiting for him to, like, literally just be a nuclear bomb at all times if he's half celestial. And if anything, we've come to know that celestials are, like, even more powerful, thanks to Eternals. But even just seeing how effective Ego was, where he could literally create life. Right? If I remember that correctly. But either way, you get what I'm saying. The power set, he's 100% more than just a guy with guns. And I thought that he was going to be a guy that didn't have to use rocket boots to fly around. And so I just... What happened to that? And everything else, I mean, again, I think that's the question I have, because James Gunn wrote and directed this whole thing. So he knew that that's where they were going, and he knew that he'd go beyond it. But I just feel like nobody's acknowledged it since Volume 2. Like, not even Infinity War and Endgame. So I'm just confused, like, maybe the Celestial isn't as powerful as I think it is? But at the same time, I don't think they made it very clear as to what they can and can't do anyway. So... well, I won't go too far, but there's a scene in the movie where I'm like, are you trying to convince me that he's in danger? Because this whole time I'm thinking he's a Celestial and he's actually not in danger right here. But the narrative is he's in danger. And so maybe I'm just kind of lost on the messaging here. And somebody can feel free to clarify in the comments if they want. But going back to my point about how much I really just respect this movie, and the reason why I think it just shows what can be really great about the MCU is the fact that from beginning to end, this was James Gunn's baby. Much like Black Panther is Ryan Coogler's baby, and they've been able to adapt so well to what has happened on and off screen, and also being able to give us as fans the best versions of themselves and their storytelling and their characters, and I just really admire that. So even though Guardians Volume 3 wasn't my favorite of the trilogy, I still really loved a lot of moments in it, because it's a long movie, and because, again, I feel like it kind of like meddles around in the second act. I don't know how rewatchable it's going to be for me, but it definitely is an impactful film in the multiverse saga, which is incredible because it has nothing to do with the multiverse, other than the fact that, we're dealing with another Gamora. But even narratively, I think they make that work, and I think that especially because ultimately where we end the movie, how do I put this? Because I don't want to spoil way too much of that either. Basically where Quill ends up, it's such a good ending for Quill that the choice to have a new Gamora doesn't affect it, if that makes sense. Because ultimately, I think most characters end up where they should, and they all had a bow tie ending, in my opinion. I'm not dissatisfied with the way that any of these characters ended their time with us, without a doubt. So, and I think that's something I want to talk more about, and I want to see more people discuss. And I think as more time goes on, I think we'll all collectively kind of feel that way. You know, here's the thing about the reactions to the movie. And again, Black Panther Wakanda Forever has a very similar, if we're looking at Rotten Tomatoes, I get it. If we're looking at Rotten Tomatoes, they have a very similar score. For Guardians 3, 81 tomato meter, 95 audience. Black Panther, 84 tomato meter, 94. So very similar in that regard. And I do think that post Endgame, they are the best two movies. And I mentioned this in another video that I made, but look, at the end of the day, what works best is just taking care of the legacy characters. With the exception of Thor Love and Thunder, which didn't take care of the legacy characters, and Ant-Man Quantumania, which didn't have really any character to it at all, and it just cared way too much about serving the multiverse. So when we're just telling strong stories with the main characters, that's what works the best for Marvel. And I think that this rut that we've been in a way, it's good that it happened when so many projects were accumulating. It's good that it happened now, because I feel like it'd be a lot harder, or maybe it wouldn't. It'd be a lot harder to analyze if the MCU was still cranking out 2 movies and that's it a year. But with the sample size that they've given us, and based on our reactions and rejection for most of this stuff, I think they were able to quickly just be like, look, this is a pattern. They don't like this, and this. They do appreciate this, and this. And in a weird way, it's kind of good that they got it. I liken it back to, my days watching college basketball. When, rooting for the University of Kentucky, and we always had super young teams that had a ton of freshmen on them, and we always, every year, expected them to go to the NCAA tournament so we can win another championship. And it's a lot of pressure to put on those players. But anytime that they would lose early in the season before they got to division play, conference play, whenever they would lose, we would always turn it around and be like, let's get the losses out of the way now. That way we can learn these lessons when it actually matters. So the fact that we saw so many losses when they were first experimenting with Disney Plus content, when we saw them first experimenting with all these brand new characters, and feeling aimless. It's good that it all happened then, because imagine if it happened before the Infinity Saga concluded. Imagine if it happened before Infinity War, and the build up to those movies would have been catastrophic. I feel like, honestly, we're far enough away from Secret Wars, because I'm not gonna lie, I haven't lost hope for King Dynasty. I don't know how to be excited for that movie. No clue. And I don't know that I ever will be hyped or excited for King Dynasty. And I felt that way when I saw the Marvels trailer. And I like those characters, but I'm not passionate about them. So we saw the Nick Fury being in space tag at the end of, was that Captain Marvel? Whatever it was. But it's like, I'm only excited for Secret Invasion right now. I don't know how to be excited for anything, let alone King Dynasty. I don't know who the Avengers are. Captain America 4, I'm really excited. Secret Invasion and Captain America 4 and Daredevil are the only 3 projects that I'm excited about. Spider-Man 4, it's not real yet. I know it's real somewhere in an office, but it's not real yet. So I've given up hope that I'm ever going to get excited for King Dynasty. But I think we're far enough from Secret Wars. Oh, I'm sorry, Deadpool 3 I'm excited about. But we're far enough from Secret Wars where I'm still holding out hope that that can hopefully be an Infinity War in-game level film. But in a way, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 being good mostly benefits the Guardians, which is a good thing. And it's a reminder of what once was, which is okay. Makes me happy. But it doesn't change how I feel about anything else that's yet to come. Because this was an end of a trilogy. So it's kind of a bittersweet feeling at the end of the day. And I think it's another reason why I'm just, I don't know, speaking so diplomatically, but I really respect this film but it's like, I'm not as excited as I was about it as I was when I saw Volume 1. So it's just, I don't know. And here's another thing too that I really need to assess. I don't know that I can recognize this in the moment, but maybe personally, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, personally, I might just be outgrowing it. I might be outgrowing the MCU. Or maybe it's a Star Wars thing, where now like the MCU is so many different things to so many people that like every project can't capture, and Marvel's going to try desperately to recapture everyone's imagination. But maybe it's like the way that Secret Invasion and Miss Marvel are two wildly different. Maybe they were never going to hold the same audience. Maybe that was just never going to happen as the MCU continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't know. It's hard to tell. And we'll know more once the MCU course corrects. But it's something I have to consider. Maybe I'm just outgrowing the MCU personally. And maybe that's why I'm just hungry for things like Dune 2 and Oppenheimer. It's like there was a picture that was posted about like all the movies coming out in November. It was Songbirds and Dune and something else and Captain Marvel. And I did my thing where it's like, it's not like my thing, but I did the thing where it's like one of these things doesn't belong. And I was talking about the Marvel movie. And if this was 5 years ago, I wouldn't have had that attitude, but I did. So that's another thing I need to figure out. Is maybe I'm just outgrowing it, and it's not for me anymore. But only time will tell. It's a weird conversation to have, but and I think examining everything on social media, and by the way, this is something I need to think more about too, and I know this, but I also forget. Because for the last 3 days on Twitter, I've seen, and if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen my reactions to this. I have seen nothing but like hyperbole with how great this film is. And I know that there are things in this movie that didn't hit as hard for me, but will hit harder with others. I mean, I was certainly emotional. I mean, I cried several times in this movie. Don't get me wrong. I cried several times, and I found it to be very emotional. But there's also just a ton of hyperbole about like Guardians being the best trilogy. And the only reason why that stuff, like, the only reason why I get annoyed with it is because Guardians Volume 2 is, for the last 6 years, rarely discussed. And all of a sudden, it belongs to the greatest superhero trilogy of all time. And it's like, I just don't understand. But here's the thing about Twitter. And the reason why those kind of reactions that I'm having, like where I'm wrong, is that every time I see an opinion on one thing and on another, I always assume that it's the same people doing it because it's on Twitter. But it's like, no, the person who thinks the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, yes, this tweet is popping up in my feed right now, but they probably always loved Volume 2, and just because that person was never included all my other time on Twitter, and where I saw Guardian Volume 2 not being discussed at all, now all of a sudden I'm surprised, and it's like, no, it's not like that person came from out of nowhere, or that take came from out of nowhere, it's the person just never appeared on my timeline before. So I know that there are people exist It's like the Kentucky Derby. That's why I started the episode like this. It's like the Kentucky Derby. I need to just accept that people out there like what they like, and I understand that. But sometimes it's hard to know because my timeline is just my timeline. And for years, when I've seen that I'm on the same page with people who like are just so indifferent about Volume 2, it's like, oh, all of a sudden Volume 2 is like a great movie, and now Guardians is the greatest trilogy of all time. Like, who had that opinion up until today? Like, it never even occurred to me that the Guardians trilogy could be the greatest superhero trilogy of all time because of just based on where we've been. It never even occurred to me. But there are fanboys out there that, you know, like things that I don't. And so that kind of stuff just, at first when I see it, I'm just like, where did this come from? But it's really Twitter's fault because it's all algorithms and everybody's in their bubble. And anyway, so it's just one of those things that I need to become more disciplined on. But sometimes it is frustrating where it's like, where did this come from? People like this exist. Like all the Snyder fans that like I just assume aren't real people because I've never met anyone who cares passionately about Zack Snyder in my life. I think that about concludes. Oh, even like the mean-spirited stuff from Guardians Volume 2, I don't think it really carried too much into... I think we just got more of Mantis. And I think over time I've grown an appreciation for Mantis. So I felt like it was a little bit more even keel in terms of how she was received. Because I didn't really think she was received well in the first... or the Volume 2. But anyway... I think mostly everything narratively, character arcs, I think most of that worked. I just wasn't entirely invested in the entire movie is all. I think that's all I got without running the risk of going in circles. Guys, get 15% off of any movie palette you like. Just use the promo code REWATCH15 at checkout. You can see, if you're watching on YouTube, that right there. Go to moviepalette.com. I think the one that I had posted there, that is Blade Runner 2049. And then the one behind me that you can see up against my wall that I still have to hang up is Fight Club. You can get whatever movie... I want to see the Top Gun Maverick one. Whatever movie palette you like, I can get you 15% off. Just use rewatch15 at checkout for that. I think I'm done with the Audible one because I don't think I've ever gotten a single subscription from that, so I'm going to take that down eventually. But Movie Palette has been really good to me, and you guys have been good to me because it's been super supportive, and it's going to help me get out of debt. So thank you so much for doing that, guys. That's all I have on Guardians Volume 3 until I come up with more, which we'll do it on, let's see, we're about 2 months away from the next Marvel ranking. I'm going to do it when Secret Invasion is done. I think they released the episode count for it. I just don't remember what it is off the top of my head. But what is it, June 20th or something? So it's like 6 weeks away from premiering. And then however many weeks after that, that's when I will do the next MCU ranking. So there's that. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to finish my mushroom cold brew in my B-Dubs cup. Gonna do some laundry and hit the gym. I appreciate you. Thank you.